Hello and welcome to today's European SharePoint, Office 365 and Azure Community webinar. My name is Shane and I'm delighted to be joined by Bernd Hesse, who will be talking to you about the rapid workflow implementation with GBS AppDesigner, a walkthrough of a workflow with SAP integration. Remember to join in the conversation about today's webinar on Twitter. Our Twitter handle is @EuropeanSP and our hashtag is ESPC17. After the webinar, we will have a questions and answers session. Type any questions you have for Bernd in the questions window. Some questions will be selected and answered at the end of the presentation. This webinar will be recorded and you will be notified by email when it is available. Don't forget to join us in Dublin from the 13th to the 16th of November 2017 for the European SharePoint Office 365 and Azure Conference. Since so much happened at Ignite, our tickets are selling fast. So book today at sharepointeurope.com to avoid disappointment. And now I'm going to pass you over to our webinar presenter, Bernd Hesse. Hello, Bernd.
Good morning, everyone. Thank you, Shane.
I'm just going to make your presenter there, Bernd. And while that's kicking in, just one question for you, Bernd. I know you've been to the European SharePoint Office 365 and Azure Conference previously. What would you say to someone who is thinking about coming but just haven't made up their mind fully yet?
First of all, come. Well, last year in Vienna was my first conference, and I must say it was very well organized. I attended a lot of interesting sessions, met a lot of people, talked to a lot of people, and also the showroom was packed with interesting companies and products. So all in all, it was a delight.
Brilliant. Okay, Bernd, take it away.
Okay, thank you. So, again, welcome to this webinar, and the topic of my presentation will be a walkthrough of a workflow with SAP integration done based on a product called GBS AppDesigner. So I want to give you a practical example of what we're doing with AppDesigner, well, this actually came out of a project which we did with a partner of ours, and but of course, we had to simplify it for today's presentation so that everyone can follow what we're doing there and why. Let me start with saying a few words about myself and the company I'm working for. As mentioned, my name is Bernd Hesse, and I'm Senior Product Manager at GBS. And if you want to contact me after the presentation, so you find my email address on the slide, so feel free to contact me. Well, I started in the field of academics and did some research around workflows, and then moved on to become a consultant and did real workflow implementation projects. And then became a product manager at GBS. And in that role, I'm responsible for a lineup of products, and GBS AppDesigner is amongst those, and it's the most important product line. The company GBS, which stands for Group Business Software, is around for quite a while now, since 1992 exactly, and well, we have two main areas to focus. The first one is messaging and email, the other one is collaboration and workflow. And we're happy to have served 5,000 customers, and that 4 million users are using at least one of our products. And yeah, I think so much for myself and the GBS. Moving on to the topic, business process management. There are a couple of challenges which we meet every time we're talking to customers. And I want to briefly go through those. And the first one is that the business processes that are lived in the organizations are not flexible enough. I mean, worst case scenarios, they are still based on pen and paper, and people sign paper and fill out forms and send it through the organization. But even if you have a digital process, you still have to think about how flexible the solution is to adapt to frequent change, because processes tend to be changed a lot. And the next challenge is that you need intuitive tools to involve your business users. Because let's be honest, the line of business experts, the domain experts, are the ones that have to specify the workflow and live with the workflow. So you should involve them as much as possible and not separate them from the IT team or the IT partner that's doing the workflow for you. That's the next challenge. And the other two are well, related to each other. So the challenges are that many of our clients do not just have SharePoint. That's not their only platform. They have different platforms in their organization, and nobody wants to spend a lot of money for a workflow engine for SharePoint, for example, and then spend more money for another engine for another system. And so that's one challenge. And closely linked to that is the question, are you completely on-premise? Are you living in the cloud already? Are you moving to the cloud, back from the cloud? Are you living a hybrid scenario? And of course, you don't want to spend money on an on-premise engine that you cannot take with you to the cloud, for example. So these are the things that you should keep in mind. And we address them with a product called AppDesigner. And what it basically does is it allows you to intuitively create workflows and forms, and that even without programming knowledge. It's a whole product line, and we support different platforms. The one that's relevant for today is, of course, SharePoint Office 365, but we also support the IBM technology stack. You can run AppDesigner as a standalone solution without any other platform, and that on-premise or as a cloud software as a service offering. You can connect with mobile devices, and so platform choice is a really important thing for GBS. The picture that you see on the right side depicts some of the major components. So, as already said, processes are the first building block of AppDesigner. So they are based on BPMN, notation for processes. Forms are the other building block. We have built-in design tools. And if you go with GBS and then choose to implement our email solution, then you can have a really tight integration between your process world and your email collaboration. So now that I've pointed out that we support different platforms, let's focus on SharePoint and Office 365. What can we do for this platform specifically? So we add workflow features and forms features to the sites that you have in SharePoint. And you can still continue to use your out-of-the-box features, so the beloved lists and libraries, and you can integrate them with your very specific custom workflows that are only relevant to your organization. And of course, we want to achieve that you have fewer system discontinuities, so you don't have to switch between your workflow platform and your document platform back and forth. So having all the data, all the relevant processes in one platform is a good thing. That's what you can achieve with AppDesigner. And if you're interested in the technical side, well, I pretty much left out the technical side. Let's just say that it's implemented as a provider-hosted add-in, so it uses the Microsoft way of adding apps and add-ins to your SharePoint infrastructure. If you're more interested in that part, well, you can ask questions at the end, or we can have a follow-up session. I wanted to mention a recent study that was done in Germany this year. It was specifically about workflows in SharePoint, and well, I used some of the results in my presentation. You can see the source. So the study was done by a university in Stuttgart and also by one of the biggest German SharePoint communities, SharePoint 360 DE. so a news outlet for SharePoint related stuff, and you can get the study for free, but unfortunately for some of you it's just available in German as far as I know. So I translated the results myself. Moving on, so what were some of the questions that I found interesting? So first, do you use SharePoint to implement workflows? So one can ask that question, and 50% said no and just not doing this. But if you see that over half of all the German companies that answered or took part in the study said yes, we're already doing that, and another 26% said yeah, we are planning to do this in the future, which means give or take 1 or 2 years, let's say 80% of the companies will use SharePoint to implement workflows. The next question is, which are the departments that you use workflows for or are planning to provide workflows for? And I think what's striking is it's not just IT any longer. In many companies, the IT starts with workflows because they have the tools, they have the knowledge, they have expertise. And but if you look at this chart, you will see that a lot of different departments are actually using workflows and are planning to add more workflows to it. So you really have to think about all the diverse people that will get into contact with your workflows. So please remember my initial statement that you need to involve your line of business users with intuitive tools. And you can see it's not just an IT topic any longer. Next question that I wanted to mention is, are these SharePoint-related workflows more like a silo, or do they need data from other systems? Do they need interfaces? And, 1/3 said, no, all our workflows are just contained within SharePoint itself. Many companies said, yes, our workflows need data from other systems, and additional 14% of the companies said, they said partly, which I translate into, some of our workflows need data, some others do not. But which means we have like half of the companies that say at least one of our workflows needs data from elsewhere. And you need to think about that. Next question. So if you're using workflows in SharePoint, do you think the out-of-the-box features that Microsoft delivers are sufficient to support your needs? And to put it mildly, and to start with the good news, 12% are completely satisfied with what Microsoft provides. But as you can see, some chose to start developing own features, workflow-related features. 22% directly say no, this is not sufficient, and 36% say for some workflows it was okay, but for the more complex workflows, I guess it was not enough. So 12% are satisfied, and the others have to come up with other ideas. And the ideas companies come up with is, building or buying an additional workflow engine and forms engine for SharePoint. And now one of the last questions. So now that you have implemented or bought a workflow solution on top of the SharePoint environment that you have, how satisfied are you with it? And of course, as GBS, we also are under the addressees of that question. So I wouldn't call the results mediocre, but I see a lot of improvement for all the solutions out there. And of course, that's true for GBS AppDesigner as well. So you can always improve. Okay. So how could you use a workflow engine on top of SharePoint? And I mean, there's just a myriad of things you could do with it. I'm not going to read through all of those topics on this slide, but so in case you are not sure what you could do with it, just some ideas. So let's say one of the strongholds is every time someone has to apply for something, applying and then manage all the applications. Of course, that's something that is one of the key ideas behind workflows. But then you have your customer relations and also all the internal organization where you want to spread out information like service instructions or something like this, your organizational handbook and all those things like price lists and so on. Just to name a few. The next thing I would like to quickly mention is the topic of interfaces. We already learned that in many cases you need to reach out to other systems to get data or functions and integrate them into your SharePoint workflows. And well, this slide is about AppDesigner, but also true for other products. So what could you do with your interfaces? I would like to start with the front end. So what does the user see? And more or less, in a very simplified answer, I'd say they are working with the forms. They see the forms. Forms contain a lot of fields to enter values, and they have buttons that they can click. And interfaces could help to, for example, automatically calculate values. So just fetch values from another system and fill out fields. But then there's a lot of other field logic where data from other systems could help you control the visibility of data, the ability to edit the data. You could reach out to external systems to, prepare the selection choices that the users can choose from. You can prepare default values. You can validate whether the entered values can be accepted by the system and delegate that decision to another system than SharePoint. And of course, with the buttons, you can run any code, or store things in another system, read values from another system, and so on. Then there's the backend side. For AppDesigner in the backend, there's the workflow engine that determines which steps will follow the current step and which decisions are possible. So what are the possible routes that this precise workflow can take? And you can use other systems than SharePoint to get data, and based on those data points, automate the decisions or automate the routing. So this is one of the things that it's used for the most. Then data exchange, of course, reading data from a system and writing data to the system can be done in a single task. So if you look at the example, so every time I'm in task B, at the end of task B, I will write my input to another system. Or on a flow, so you could say only if I move from B to C, I want to hand over values to SAP, for example. But if I move from B to D, then I don't want to do this. So this kind of data exchange can be done. And again, you can validate if the workflow is in a state that can be routed to the next step, or there's still some work left on it. The last part I wanted to mention, also a back-end topic. AppDesigner has a concept that's called agents. So this is some independent code that runs in the background, and it can be triggered manually or it can be run periodically based on a schedule. So you can use interfaces to other systems like SAP to have scheduled actions. You can have a periodical data exchange, so like every night or every week, and so on. And of course, you can automatically start workflows. So you can look into other systems and see if there's something that needs to be done. And if so, you can automatically start workflows. Also, for example, always on the last day of the month, you look at another system and then start some reporting workflow, for example. Good. So far, so good. The practical example that I want to look at together with you today is something about the fleet management for company-owned cars. A partner of us, a company called S&N, they have an SAP product that does exactly that, fleet management for company-owned cars. And at least in Germany, there's a legal requirement to check driver's licenses twice a year. So every 6 months, you have to verify that the driver still has a valid driver's license. And the question is, who will do this check? Well, definitely not the manager of the HR department. So what you see, and most of the times, is that you have front gate security or a reception desk or things like that, and then these people will meet all employees getting onto the site every morning, and they can stop them and do the check, and then hand back the results to other people. But one of the main problems is these guys do not have access to SAP, so they don't have their login. They are not trained to use SAP. Well, but sure, they have some desktop computer with browser access to the SharePoint intranet, or they have at least a tablet to access that workflow mobile. And so that was the practical example, and we implemented something together with our partner, and what we implemented is something like what I tried to describe with the following flow. SAP is the leading system. SAP has all the data, all the master data, and knows about all your cars, all your drivers, all your employees, all your licenses, and it knows when the last check took place and when the next check is due. So if SAP determines that there is a license check that is required, it automatically initiates workflows in AppDesigner. So then you can see it in your SharePoint list. Then with some SharePoint list, you can display all the checks that are due in the next days or weeks to your security personnel. When the employee that needs to be checked arrives at the gate, the security can stop the employee, and the employee can present the driver's license. So then there's just a manual visual check that everything's in order, it's valid, it has the required license class, and well, if it's a license from another country, is this valid in my country, and so on and so on. And the result of the visual check is entered into a form and then saved into the backend database. So there it resides again in AppDesigner with the full decision. AppDesigner automatically transfers the results back to the leading system, SAP. SAP accepts it and sets the next check date to 6 months from now. And then the next time the whole process runs, SAP will provide more license checks. So this is a periodical solution, which means every night SAP initiates workflows, and also every night all the results are written back. So, and then you can configure, for example, that you always want to see the checks that are due in the next 2 weeks, and so this is what subsequently will be initiated in AppDesigner. Okay, what are the requirements to implement a solution like this? Keep in mind, this is the simplified version. So the workflow should be as follows. If the master data in SAP accounts for a check, then a new workflow is automatically initiated. The next step is the manual check. The outcome can be, well, either positive, which means the license was valid and it was verified, or it can be negative. Negative might be the license is invalid, or it was lost, or stolen, or the employee didn't carry it that day. Many reasons why it's negative. Then after the check, the process goes to the HR department and they have to make a decision. So if it was positive, they can just acknowledge that everything's fine. If it was negative, they have to make a decision. So they can decide to repeat the license check for a couple of times, but sooner or later they will reclaim the company car. That's the worst case scenario for the employee. And after this is done, there needs to be another update of the master data in SAP, and then SAP can, for example, determine the next check date then in 6 months. Okay, regarding the forms, what do we need to deal with? Regarding the driver, well, the basic details we should capture is first name, last name, then the employee number, and the due date for the next license check, so that we can, for example, sort the list chronologically. The most urgent ones at the top. So this is the minimum of things that we should know. Regarding the check, the minimum would be the date, the inspector, the result of the check, and the possibility to enter comments, for example, a reason why a check is negative. Well, as far as the HR department is concerned, they only need to be involved when the outcome was negative. Then they have to make a decision. Also, they should comment why they took that decision or another, and then so this is what we need for the HR department on the form. And of course, we need some views to list the required checks. Generally, in AppDesigner, you design your workflow in 3 steps. So most of the time, everyone starts with designing the form, placing all the fields onto the form and labeling everything, adding some logic. Then you can model the process based on those forms that you have created. And once the model is ready, you can define the list or library that you want to use it. And this is what I'm going to show you in SharePoint itself. So I'm gonna quickly switch to my browser and see what we have here. Okay, so this is a little demo server of SharePoint 2016 on-premise that I'm running. Well, please apologize the performance of it. It's not that powerful, but it should be sufficient. I have prepared a list for today's presentation that lists the checks that are due. So we have last name, first name, the employee number, the next check, and the current task. But before we start looking at the result, I want to show you the design tools and how things look in the design tools. And then at the end, I will do some demos of the workflow. So this is the provider-hosted add-in that has a design area. And in that design area, I can specify my forms, my processes, my agents, and some other things that we'll not touch today. So regarding forms, you can see that there are 3 One is the main form for all the manual tasks in the process, and then we have two forms that are used in the automated tasks. One is a message to SAP, so what we transfer back to SAP, and then a reply received from SAP that it received everything and the workflow can be actually closed. So if we start with the main form, so what you can see here is, first of all, you could see that it just opened up in another browser tab. So the tools are built in. And on the screen, you can see that on the left-hand side, there are all the field types and all the content types that you can use on the form. And in the bigger part on the right side, you have your canvas, and you can lay out your form onto your canvas. So this has already been done, but to show you how it's usually done, so here is some. So you can see it's always a grid, and here is an empty field. And if I wanted to add another field to it, then I would just go to the left side and to the palette and see if there's something I would like to add to my form. So the most basic type of control is an input field, and I just drag it onto my form, and I say this is my webinar field. So I label it. It has a unique ID that I might need later in my process or in some other place in the list, for example, but I can change it and call it webinar. Then I can do more things, of course. I can decide whether the field is required, and I can also add more constraints. That's how it's called. So I can say, no, it does not just have to be, well, it's not required per se, but I want to add another constraint. For example, the length has to be at least 5 characters. So it can be accepted by the system. And if I want to do that, I would have to write JavaScript. If I'm not capable of doing this, which is totally fine, then I have an interface to click the logic. So if you're composing formulas in Excel, then you know how this is done. So you can say, I have my webinar field, and the webinar field has a length of more than 4, and then it's writing the JavaScript for me. So I can concentrate on the upper part, and if people are able to write JavaScript, so the IT department or other people, power users, then of course you can do it here and then add all of the magic of JavaScript. So for example, call a web service from another system and get the data or the validation from there. So this is all about the validation, and you've already seen the formula editor. And with the same formula editor, you can control, is this field visible? Yes, no, or based on a formula. Is this field read-only? Yes, no, based on a formula. And you can also give the field an initial value or calculate the value in all cases. So then, and the interface to define that is the same that we already used. So we could say, I want to calculate the value, and I will do this by if the employee number starts with a 5, or if the zip code if the zip code starts with 2. And if in another selection field someone chose the first option, then I want to do this, then I want to do this, then the field should be read-only, then the field should be invisible. So for all these things, you can use this formula editor. And what else can you do? You can add a custom help message and so on. So let's say this is the basic creation of fields. Then if you would have more empty space on the form, you can move it around. So it's a drag and drop solution, but I keep it like this. Okay, so this is the forms designer, and let's see what we have prepared. So some visual elements. Of course, this is optional. You can see that we are dealing with sections on the form. So to structure my input, and you can see we automatically fetch master data from SAP, and this will be read only. Nobody should edit this. And you have and as I already mentioned, we have last name, first name, employee number, when was the last check, who checked it, who's doing, so what's the time for the next check. Then you have the actual verification, where you have to select the date which the verification took place, who did it. The result is either positive or negative, and you can enter a comment. And then we have the HR department. They only need to see this part when the result was negative, but then they have to decide what they want to do, repeat the check or reclaim the car, and they can also add a comment for, so if they say repeat the check, they can add a comment for the next inspector. I already showed you that you can control the visibility of a field. You can also control the visibility or editability of a section or parts of a section. And here you can see that with the form editor, we created that this whole HR department section should only be visible when the workflow is in a state called DLC negative. So once you use this forms editor many times, you will get used to the JavaScript notation, and if not, you can still use the forms editor, the formula editor, sorry, to click your formulas. So this should only be visible when the result, so when we are in a certain workflow state. Okay, so this is the form that we created. Then there's the process. In this example, we only have one process. It's called SAP Workflow. Again, please notice that it's just a click away. It will open as a new browser tab. And again, you have some possible elements that can be added to your canvas in the middle. But here you have additional options on the right side. And it's so whatever you select here, then you will have different properties on the right side. Okay, so how is this process laid out? So we start with the first part. The first part is performed by AppDesigner itself in the back end. So it's not a manual task, it's an automated task. And periodically we'll check SAP for new checks. And if we need to check driver's licenses, then the whole verification procedure will automatically be started. Then we hand over the process to the group of inspectors. So let's say front gate security or whatever you use in your organization. They will do the basic check. The outcome can be either positive or negative. Well, let's start with a negative option. So the negative option will lead to a routing to the HR department, and they have to process the negative check. In this process, the section will be visible that is otherwise hidden, that we've seen earlier. Then the HR department can make the decision to just repeat the check, add a comment and repeat it, and then it's routed back to the inspectors group, or they will reclaim the car. Of course, this is a process that's not digital, so hand over the keys and so on, and the papers, and so then we will just end this procedure here with a decision that the car will be reclaimed. Okay, back to the initial verification. And now we can deal with the case that it's positive. Everything went fine. So that should be the regular case. Then what will happen? It will be routed to this area here. You can see this is again something that AppDesigner will take care of. And you can see here are some, so the icon is different. So these are manual tasks. These are automated tasks. And we'll write the result back to SAP. SAP will process it and then send a receipt back. Once the receipt has been received, we'll route the whole process again to the HR department, but this time with a positive receipt from SAP. They just have to acknowledge it. They say, okay, I've seen it, and then the procedure can be ended as well. So how do you do things like that? So this is again a graphical drag and drop interface. So for example, you could say from this task, there's another task going back to the inspectors group. And then the inspectors have to do another decision. They can either send the whole process to the HR department, or they can decide to have AppDesigner do something automatically. Then you go ahead and label things. So this is inspector again, and they can make decisions like go to A or go to B. So this doesn't make a lot of sense. I just want to show you that you go ahead as a next step and label all that you have painted. So you label the tasks, you label the routes, and the AppDesigner workflow engine will analyze your model and act accordingly. So whatever you see later in the demo will be that so all these labels are used for the front end. You can see what's the current task, what was the last task, what's the protocol of this running workflow, what happened already, which steps have been taken, what decisions have been made. And all this front end stuff is directly connected to what I entered here as labels. And we'll see it later. And another thing, so you can see that these are lanes, swim lanes in a swimming pool. That's how it's called in BPMN. And there's the inspectors lane. You can define who your inspectors are, some group from your Active Directory, for example. And every time you move a task here, there will be automatically attached some other details like who should receive editor rights, who should receive reading rights, who should be informed by email, what kind of email template should be used, what are the escalation settings, So how many days can this task wait before we have to escalate, send more emails, take the task away? Who is the stand-in when the person that took over the task then gets sick, for example? Who can act as a stand-in? Everything here can be, so everything can be set here. You see here's who's the stand-in, who are additional readers, is there a checklist that has to be checked off, and so on and so on. And then by simply moving tasks from one lane to another, or by adding more tasks to a lane, everything will just work automatically. And that's the beauty of the system. So just by labeling things and linking things and moving things to the right lane, changes can be really quickly done to an existing workflow, and new workflows can be implemented very quickly. So I will remove this stuff that we don't need, and so we stick with the original process. This part here will be done by an agent, so we can see that. So I selected that everything that's in this lane, all the tasks that end up in this lane will be performed by an SAP agent back. That's the name of the agent. And this agent has a schedule, and whenever there's the next periodic run of the agent, then all the tasks that have accumulated here will be routed to the next task. Okay, so we have seen the main form, we have seen the main workflow. Yeah, I can show you that in this particular task, there's a specific form. I told you so in the regular tasks, we use a form that's called license check. But in this specific task, we use the form message to SAP, and here we use another specific form called reply from SAP, and you can find those also here. Okay, we've seen the form. I mean, I can show you for example, the receipt form. It's more technical. You see all the different stuff that the interface to SAP delivers, a lot of messages, and we'll see it in action later. Okay, what we need to look at is the area with the agents. We have one agent that does the lookup. So it looks to it goes to some web service from SAP and looks if there are new checks that need to be performed, and then initiates workflows. And then I have another agent that writes all the results back. And what we can do is, if I prepared it correctly, then it should be that here we have 5 processes currently, but there should be a 6th one that I just activated. And if I go to the SAP lookup agent and I start the agent, then get back to my list and refresh it, then you can see that there's another entry. Well, first there were 5, now there are 6, so it fetched more checks that are required from SAP. Okay, so now I'm going back to the list, because what I've shown you here is the provider-hosted admin. That's for administrators and designers. The regular users will continue to use lists and libraries. And if we look at just one of the examples, I hope I didn't lose my session in the last 50 minutes. Last time I was here was before the presentation started, so maybe I have to re-log in. Let's see. Okay, no. What you can see is that there's a process in the status of now we do the check. The start of the procedure was automatically done. And the next steps will be message to SAP, process outcome, end of procedure. So that's a visual representation of the state I'm in. I can also take a look at additional details like what's the protocol, what already happened. So we had an automated start that was yesterday, and now we are in progress with a checking task. You can see that the master data is read-only. You can also see that there's the webinar field which I added in the process. So all the changes that you're doing are already immediately usable if you want to do and have it that way. And now I can say I'm doing the check now. I'm acting as a guy named Arno Rautmann, and let's say the result is negative. And I add a comment. And I say this guy did not carry the driver's license today. And then I complete my task. Now the document is saved. All the validations take place. And the workflow engine in the background decide what needs to be done. It sets permissions. It routes the workflow to the next task. Sends out notification emails. And what else? So maybe, inform stand-ins and all the things that I mentioned. Now I see imagine I'm also part of the HR department, so I see that I have to process a negative check. I'm willing to do that. Okay, we have to be patient today. Okay, I can see that now the process moved one step to the right. Now I have to process a negative outcome. I can also see that from the protocol that the check is done. Now the new area for the HR department appeared, and now I say, no, I want to repeat the check and say, well, try again tomorrow. I complete the task. So what will happen now? So if you remember the process, I can show you the process again. So now I said I want to repeat the check, so it should go back to the inspector. And but the protocol should mention that it's not the first time we are checking it, but it's the second try. So now we're back in check. I added it. So let's see what we got here. We're back in check. But I can see repeat the check necessary. Comment was try again tomorrow. So imagine I'm doing this tomorrow and say no. I can say check the webinar, and I complete it. So if we look again at the workflow, you will see that now there will be a message to SAP that has to be automatically sent, and then we'll hopefully receive a receipt, and that needs to be processed. So let's see, so message to SAP, which means now I have to go back to my agents and I will manually start an agent that would otherwise be run on a timetable. But for the sake of this demo, I just start it manually. Okay, so if I refresh this, then I have process positive check. I can open it. Now we can see, for example, in the protocol what happened. So there was a negative check, then there was another check. Now the message to SAP is done, and now we're in the last state, process positive check. So I can see this is the receipt from SAP. Data transfer was successful. Following data were received, and then you can see what happened. So it's partly in German. That's based on my SAP server. So if I quickly, as a last step, switch to this SAP system. Yeah, I think I lost the connection. Let's just retry it. I have an overview about all my drivers. And I think this one here is the one that we used. Checked in webinar today, and so the next date is somewhere in April 2018. Okay, so that was the round trip from fetching data from SAP, doing the workflow in AppDesigner for SharePoint, and then sending the data back to SAP, and then in 6 months from now, the process can start again. Okay, so let me quickly wrap up my presentation. Okay, so what are the benefits of using AppDesigner to implement your workflows? You can implement all your custom processes. You get automation of your process, and you can integrate other systems. By using our other product that handles emails, you can use information from emails, attachment from emails, to automatically initiate workflows in SharePoint. If you have your requirements, you can really rapidly start your implementation and have a first working version. Of course, it's cloud ready, software as a service ready, mobile ready, and well, I'm not a sales expert on that product, but I think we have moderate licensing and operation costs, which allows a quick return on investment. Last slide. So if you found this presentation interesting and the product interesting, what could be next steps? So please, again, as already mentioned at the beginning, come to Dublin and meet us there. So GBS has a booth, and we can discuss the product or the process if you would like to. If you cannot wait that long, you can go to the AppDesigner website anytime. And if you would like to speak to me and have a follow-up session or ask questions, do not hesitate to send an email. Okay, that's what I wanted to show you. Back to you, Shane.
Thanks, Bernd, and a super presentation. We're nearly out of time, so we'll just take maybe one question here that we have in. So it is one of the challenges that were mentioned was the lack of involvement of business users. How does AppDesigner address this?
It's a good question. So the idea is that in other companies, people are using tools like Visio, for example, to structure their ideas about the process. So more or less they're painting a picture of how it looked like, and then in addition they have to write a 500 pages long specification document to tell the IT professionals what they should do. I think this is not the correct agile approach. So I think the same tools could be used by the line of business users. just with if they have the permission, just one click away are the design tools. They could start designing the forms, designing the workflows as far as they are able to, and then use this artifact, a running first version of the workflow to improve it. So add interfaces, add automation, things that maybe the line of business departments cannot do themselves. But so this is our idea how to involve the line of business departments by giving them the exact same tools and the possibility to get working workflows.
Super. Bernd, thank you so much for taking the time to do the webinar today. Very much appreciated on behalf of the community.
Yeah, sure. You're welcome. It was a pleasure.
Excellent. Thank you, Bernd. Okay, everybody, that is it for now. Join us for our next webinar on Wednesday, October 25th, 2017, from 3 p.m. to 4 p.m. CEST, where Richard Poole, CTO Europe at Harmony, will present on creating project management solutions using SharePoint Office 365. Register at sharepointeurope.com/register for webinars. Thank you all for attending and have a great day.